fix my camera. Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Disney here, and with me is Prince Disney, of course. In honor of RWBY fairy tales that kind of came out back in fall, I initially had this planned out months ago, but you know, motherhood kind of kicked in a little bit. So I have decided, if you guys remember, I have done a story earlier where it was called RWBY Fairy Tales, the story of the seasons. I have decided that in honor of RWBY fairy tales, I've decided to read to you guys each episode that appeared from this story, RWBY Fairy Tales of Remnant. Yeah, Prince Disney. And so each week I have decided that I'm going to be reading to you each story. So I hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy our first story, which is called The Grimm Child. Go on, I double dare you, Poppy said. She nudged her younger brother, Oak, toward the forest's edge, but he planted his feet and refused to budge. Mother and father forbid us from entering the woods, Oak said firmly. Poppy threw up her hands. Oh, it isn't dangerous. You're just a coward. She saw no need to worry about her parents' rules. I want to go home, Oak whimpered, his lips trembling. She retorted, It's perfectly safe. Look, I'll go in first. So she did. Poppy darted into the forest, ignoring Oak's wailing. She didn't go far, though. She slipped behind a thick tree trunk and watched her brother cry. He huddled on the ground, not 10 feet away, arms around his knees as he rocked back and forth, screaming her name. Poppy! 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 The coward wasn't even going to come after her to see if she was all right. He was utterly useless, she thought. Then suddenly, Oak stopped yelling. Poppy could still see him, but he had gone quiet. When she looked behind her, the hairs on the back of her neck rose, and the shadows seemed somehow closer. She ran out of the forest, but she shoved her shaking hands into her pockets and put on a broad smile when she reached her brother. Told you so, not a single Grimm. Now it's your turn, Poppy said, taunting him. Oak looked up, wet lines streaking the dirt on his face. Why was he always so dirty? I don't want to, he said, pouting, but Poppy insisted. It's only fair. I went first, now you have to go. If you don't, I won't be your friend. I won't play with you anymore. You have to be my friend, Oak said. I have to be your sister. It isn't the same thing, Poppy said. I have other friends, lots of other friends. He hated when she played with them and left him behind. So Oak pulled himself to his feet and gave her a miserable look. Please don't make me, he moaned. Poppy crossed her arms. Oak sighed and trudged toward the forest, dragging his feet and slowing down as he reached the first line of trees. He turned back once, and Poppy made a shooing motion. Then he walked into the forest until the darkness swallowed him. Poppy waited for Oak to shriek and run out again. He had always had an active imagination, fueled by occasional accounts of grim attacks in Vale. He often woke her up at night, crying over bad dreams. He wouldn't last long inside the forest. Poppy listened hard for him. But the forest was so silent it was almost unsettling. It was getting dark and cold, and their parents would be expecting them home soon. Oak had seemingly vanished. He's probably just hiding like I did, Poppy thought as she approached the forest once again. He copies everything I do. This time, crossing into the dark web of trees felt like crossing into another world. It was already night here, and the air itself seemed to be breathing all around her. Poppy's skin crawled as she went deeper and deeper into the forest. In the gloom, she could barely make out a trail worn into the grass and dirt, or perhaps faded and overgrown with time. Would Oak have walked here? Suddenly, she was unsure. She nearly tripped over him, a lump in the path. He was huddled over like before, head down, arms wrapped around his knees. Poppy nearly yelled at him, but instead she crouched and put a hand over his. It was ice cold. He was only a little boy. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I shouldn't have made you. Let's go home." At the word home, Oak lifted his head. His face was as pale as grim bone. He had to be frightened out of his mind, Poppy realized, and she felt a flash of sympathy. She took his hand, helped him up, and led him back the way they come. Her brother was unusually quiet, probably either in shock or sulking, she thought. He gripped her hand tightly in his, fingers digging into her flesh like he would die if he let go. But his skin never warmed. By the time she got him inside their house, she was really worried. His eyes were glassy and sunken in his pale face, the skin around him bruised like he hadn't been sleeping. Before their parents spotted him, Poppy hurried Oak into their room and explained that he wasn't feeling well. Mother and Father were angry that they were back so late, but also relieved to see them. Poppy was thankful they would never know that she and Oak had defied their wishes. She had a cold supper and followed Oak to bed as soon as she could. He was only a round shape under the covers now. When the mound twitched, Poppy said, "Shh, go back to sleep." Then more quietly she added, "I'm sorry about before. I love you." In the middle of the night, Poppy woke in a cold sweat. Screams echoed in her head, remnants of a forgotten nightmare. She looked at Oak's bed, but his sheets were twisted in a heap on the floor. He was gone. Poppy slipped out of bed, stepped out of her room, and tiptoed softly through the house, listening for Oak. Her parents' bedroom door was open, and Poppy was relieved. Oak must have gone in there to sleep, which he often did when he woke in the night. Poppy crept to the door and peered in. Her parents were sitting up in bed. Poppy walked in. "Mother? Father?" Her voice was dry and raspy, almost a whisper. Had she caught a chill in the forest? Her parents didn't respond, so she drew closer. Then she fell back in horror when she saw their faces. Their mouths gaped and their lifeless eyes were wide open. Their skin had turned as pale as bone. She couldn't bring herself to touch them, but she knew they would be cold as the solidus tundra. Poppy huddled on the floor of the room, knees to her chest, paralyzed with fear. After she had calmed herself, Poppy stood up. She still had to find her brother. "Oak!" she called, passing from room to room. He wasn't there. The front door was open, though, and she went through it into the freezing night. "Oak!" It was well after midnight, but lights were on the next door at the home of her best friend Lorimore. She walked up to the house and let herself in. Lorimore's parents lay on the ground in the kitchen in the same state as her own parents. White skin, blank eyes. With growing dread, Poppy entered Lorimor's room, where they had been playing cards just the morning before. Oak was there, slumped over Lorimor's bed, but Poppy's friend was missing. Oak's hair was now as white as his skin, and red lines radiated up his neck and down his arms. He was cold to the touch. How had he gotten here? And where was her friend? Poppy felt too numb to weep. She left the house and mechanically went to the next one on the street, where she found a similar scene. Everyone dead. She went to the house, and the next, and the next. 5 houses down, she found Lorimor's body and another missing child, an older girl named Lily. Lily's body turned up at Dijon's house, but Dijon was absent. By dawn, when Poppy had reached the very last house, she knew she was in a ghost town. Only she felt like the ghosts. She had a theory. She no longer felt anything when she found more bodies, identical to the others. She only felt curiosity and fear when she didn't find Dijon's body. He was out there somewhere, perhaps still in town, looking for more victims. What if Poppy was the last person alive? She had to leave. She hurried back to her house to pack her things, to say goodbye to her dead family and her home, to say she was sorry for bringing this nightmare on all of them, for bringing it back from the forest, because she was certain it was all her fault. She had goaded her brother into trespassing into the woods, and now she knew he had to die there. The thing she had led home with her had been wearing Oak's shape, hiding in his body, or controlling it, and waiting to kill the next people who came into its path. Poppy had heard of Grimm that could possess objects like geists, but possessing humans? Children? Anything was possible where the darkest of evil was concerned. Poppy avoided looking at her parents' room as she returned to her own. She flung open her closet, but her suitcase wasn't there, and she was overcome with a sense of dread. Suddenly, she remembered her own time in the forest, when she was peering out at her brother from the trees. Had she herself come close to being possessed? She had felt a malevolent presence in the forest after all. She had seen shadows moving in. She had escaped, but Oak had taken her place. Why not me? She wondered. Why had the Grimm possessed Oak, left her alone, killed her parents, and moved on to Lorimor? Poppy remembered where she had left her suitcase. It was under the bed. She knelt down and reached for it, groping around until her hands closed around something cold. She lurched back. No! Forget the suitcase. Forget her things. She had to go. Now! Instead, Poppy slowly lifted the covers that dangled to the floor, leaned down, and peered under. There was a body. She swallowed and reached and dragged it out. She already knew who it was, who it had to be, and she knew what that had meant to mean. She left Dijon's body there on the floor and went to the bathroom. She looked in the mirror and saw her own face. Only it wasn't her face anymore. Her long hair was as white as the snow on a mountaintop, her face as stark as a blank page. Dark veins crept toward her large, black eyes, matching the veins twining her pale arms. She was no longer Poppy. She was dead. She was now a demon. Perhaps in gratitude, or maybe to torment her with the full knowledge of what she had stated the moment she defied her parents and sent her brother into the woods, the Grimm had saved Poppy for last. The end. I hope you learned something from this story. I know I have. Until next time.